A good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. My name is Raymond Mujuni. It has been a heavy news week for the Ugandan media, encompassing with it the national budget coverage and also the deaths of Kasiria Gwanga and the sackings at Sanyu FM. In this particular edition, we pay very close attention, however, to the coverage of the budget. For the media, the budget week is an essential week of keen focus. It draws into the media's agenda for economic spending of public revenues, but it also offers a unique point of accountability for a financial year. Newsrooms across the country treat Budget Day as a heavy news day. This year's Budget Week was unfashionably different. The COVID-19 pandemic had disrupted the social, political and economic lives of many Ugandans, and so the anxiety and questions on the future lay in the hands of Matia Kasaija. In his ceremonial briefcase, he tucked away 45 trillion shillings worth of budget money. For the press, the budget coverage was one first of expectations and thereafter another of eventualities. From the headlines, the media sought to shine a light on the relevance of the budget to how monies would be shared. We speak in this Fourth Estate to Ramadan Gobi and Kwezi Tabaru, who are both media panelists and critics. The national budget of 45 trillion shillings was an after the fact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It wasn't a realistic budget, even from the speech of Matia Kasaija himself. So how did the media cover this after the fact event of the national budget? This is what we look at very closely by speaking to Kwezi Tabaro, who is a media pundit and panelist.
You watched the media of Uganda cover the budget this week, and first of all, what are your perceptions about the way the media covered the budget? Are you satisfied about what you saw and what you read?
Before I go into what I saw, I remember you sharing something from 2017 while you were at NTV covering that year's budget and using, was it a croissant or piece of bread to look at the different allocations. I think that was really creative back then. I think the coverage this time around, I didn't get a chance to watch how the budget was covered on TV, but reading through the papers, especially the Monitor, the East African and the Observer, I think it was the usual coverage, winners, losers, more emphasis on the figures and what the minister said. More could have been in terms of analysis, for example. I saw a statement made by the Minister of Finance that really went unquestioned, and this was in the Daily Monitor, I think, of Friday, where the minister in his speech said that the government had set aside a relief package to respond to COVID worth 2.9 trillion shillings, but couldn't find that in the budget. So they looked at all these different interventions within the budget, within the different sectors, accumulated them and said, our response is worth 2.9 trillion shillings, which I felt needed to be interrogated further, because this is not new money injected into the budget or injected into how much the government of Uganda is going to spend this coming financial year, but really a reorganization within government on monies they had already allocated. So I felt the media could have done a better job there. Comparing it to the region, I think the East African did a much better job comparing our budget allocations. Uganda's worth close to $12 billion. Tanzania is now worth about $15 billion. And Kenya's, I think, trumps all of them about $28 billion, which is quite significant because it's more than, Uganda's and Tanzania's budget combined. Goes to show you how big the Kenyan economy is, and no surprise, it's now considered the third biggest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that in terms of the budget coverage, more could have been done. Now, going to the specifics of the government of Uganda budget, I felt the budget was, we live in, the last 3 months, we've been living in very abnormal times. And to me, this looked to be a very normal budget that could have passed in the year 2020, 2021 without the coronavirus. So I felt, except in theme, the budget wasn't really responsive to what we've gone through as a country, what we've gone through as a region in this year, especially due to the coronavirus. I think the minister, please go ahead.
There was a lot of debate internally in the newsrooms, at least in the editorials that I sat in, on whether this budget actually catered for the fact that a lot had happened in terms of disruption by COVID-19. Disruptions in revenue, disruptions in debt, disruptions even on people's ability to come and work. And the media sort of waited to see what the minister had to say. And after the minister said what he had to say, no one questioned him about that singular fact. And I think that's where for us that I think we dropped the ball.
On which singular fact, Raymond?
The fact that the budget that the minister presented before the media was a budget drawn out before COVID-19. But after COVID-19 happened, a lot of disruption had happened. For example, revenue had been tanked by almost 48%. Debt, for example, we had already contracted debt. We didn't anticipate to contract from the IMF and even from the World Bank. No one went back and asked the minister, okay, these numbers that you just presented to us, how do they make sense with the COVID-19 pandemic and a future where we're not sure that the revenues will be coming in as you want them to come in?
Well, maybe that was a shortcoming of the media. I think the minister was also very clear that there's going to be quite a bit of adjustment of the budget and that will come before Parliament again to. For me, the most important thing is the times we're living in are quite abnormal, and I felt this needs to be reflected in the seriousness with which government of Uganda attaches to this. Its priorities, the president has outlined. Now, beyond the rhetoric, we want to see more action, but also for most of us who are asking for more participation in the economy, I think this crisis in the way we manage our affairs, especially government's involvement in the economy. There are two key things in that budget that we're an intervention by the government where they say they're going to talk to the commercial banks to see how on obligations by businesses and individuals. But that's not in government's position. Government side money and look for distressed borrowers, maybe 200 billion shillings available to the commercial banks. So if Raymond has a loan with the commercial bank should ease its pressure on him for at least 6 months. And if the commercial bank really needs that money, this account here, they can pull that money from there. And with time, Raymond will pay back. I didn't see that happening. What they did was, to put it politely, a suggestion to the banks that the banks can choose to inform. The second one was on taxes on mobile money and other e-services, especially by the. This is where government could play a significant role because government already taxes some of these services. I did not see. In fact, they maintain some of the taxes like OTT and the charges on mobile money, but they went ahead and asked the telecoms to reduce some of the charges, and I felt that's not the kind of government I want to see. I want to see the government going beyond the rhetoric to actually doing something, putting its money where its mouth is. And I think this is a much bigger debate that we should see continue. For example, are we going to do business as usual even after this pandemic? After we've seen the shortfalls of having a spectator government in an economy, where you're reduced to an advisory position to say you should do this or not do the other, and you really can't back your word with your money. I think that's something that the government of Uganda should take quite seriously.
Do you think, or how would you suggest that the media sort of holds this conversation about having a new normal that's not the normal that we had before COVID-19? How can the media move that conversation, particularly now that the budget is finally out? We know that the instruments where government will be spending its money. How can the media then have platforms and discussions that lead towards government having a change in the way that it's functioning?
I think the media already did a good job in the kinds of individuals you've been lining up for the interviews. I think for the first time in a very long time, we've had quite a number of experts in the health sector, in the economy, in business, interviewed by different media houses and newspapers. So I think that's something that we need to encourage. We need to have more expert opinion. We need to have more diverse voices and contributions, and hopefully, and I've seen this with government. I think government has been quite responsive. If you see the engagement by government officials, ministers, and technocrats in these debates, I think it's something that has been positive.
My final question to you. The media itself has taken the punches of COVID-19. Many media companies no longer have the financial muscle that they would require to operate at full capacity. And yet in their coverage of the budget, none of them seems to indicate to government that the media itself needs saving from government. Do you think this is a conversation that the media should open up with government itself?
I think as someone who is keenly interested in the media, I wouldn't encourage an incestuous relationship between that industry and government. It can be a very slippery slope. I think the media, like any other business, will have to think seriously on how they can survive these very tumultuous times. I don't think this crisis should push them into the embrace of government, because that comes with its own issues. I think media houses can do quite a lot, like any other businesses, and the opportunity that this crisis has presented us. We're having this conversation virtually. In normal times, you'd have had to drive to my place, or have had to drive to your studios. So that's an expense that has been cut. If media houses can look at ways to trim all that excess fat and excess expenses, I think at the bare minimum, quite a bit can still be done. The media is not in isolation. I know they've been noted as one of the essential services, but I think like any other sector, banking and the others, they will still have to feel the pains and adjust like everyone else.
Second part of the Fourth Estate, we speak very specifically to Ramadhan Gobi, an economist at the Mackay University Business School. He tells us about what the media should have focused on, but he also tells us about what the media got right in their coverage of the national budget. Let's hear him.
When you watched the way the media covered the budget, and as someone has keen interest in economics, what did you perceive of the coverage this week?
I think I can say it was a 50-50. It wasn't very bad, but also there are some critical questions I didn't hear the media asking. I will start with the good things. I think the media has been very good at identifying the key stakeholders in this budget, and we have conversations with them. I think that has been very good. I've seen a number of new faces coming up. I've had also going to the minister himself and asking him the tough questions. But I think the media hasn't been very good at interrogating a few things. Number one, the perennial disconnect between government intent and the budget allocations, because the government seems to be so heavy on rhetoric on those particular areas like industrialization. Now they are talking of import substitution and so on. This is not the first time we are hearing this, but what about the allocations in terms of the internal, use of money on the various activities? I think we are putting a lot of emphasis and time on how much does each sector get, without interrogating how each sector is using the money that they get. So I think the media needs to interrogate more on that. How do sectors use money? Then too, also, I think the media has tended to be so heavy on expenditure side and not interrogating enough the revenue side of the budget. Where are we going to get this money, which we are talking about, 45 trillion shilling budget? Is it actually anyway a 45 trillion budget? What is the level of discretionary budget in it? The budget which the government has flexibility to deal with, because I want to tell you always that I'm very uncomfortable with the overall figure which is given to the public, creating an impression that this is a very huge budget, when in the real fact the discretionary budget, the one which they can appropriate, is almost half of that figure.
So looking at particularly the revenue side of things, one of the criticisms that many of the journalists that I know speak of is that government is not open with their data. They do not declare how they have shortfalls in revenue, and if they declare on a quarterly basis, which makes it hard for the media to hold them onto account. Do you think that the media missed out because they lack access to this information, or it's just that the media was being lazy?
Yes, I think both. One, of course, government has never been as open as they are lately. I think government is quite open to the extent they can give data. If you approached many of these agencies, if you approached the Minister of Finance, it is open. For example, their budget website is quite open. I know there is a lot of information, and if someone wants to deny you information, they give you a lot of it. But you can as well be able to exploit that by picking a few figures from there and then interrogate backwards with the authorities on how, for example, they came up with the tax policies which they want to implement. Areas like this interest in rental income, the interest in alternative minimum tax, this tax on loss-making kind of companies, those which are declaring losses, and also the taxes on, some new taxes on SMEs. Now, in the heat of this COVID we are in, how can you expect to get money from those sources when actually the SMEs, the loss-making companies are also now, they must increase in number, and also rental income, people moving to work remotely. How do you expect to get more commercial revenue, more commercial rent to be taxed? So these kind of questions haven't been fully interrogated, leave alone now the tax collections are around this time, because we are more interested now in the future. How are we going to address these revenue shortfalls given that COVID has hit the areas government was planning to tax?
As an economist, one of the debates that happened in the newsrooms, at least those that I was in, was that this budget was drawn up before COVID-19 happened. And so the debate was, do you cover it with the sense that government priorities must in a way remain the same? Or do you cover it in the way that government has remained largely insensitive to the fact that COVID-19 has disoriented revenue, disoriented expenditure? If you were to weigh in on that debate, how would you weigh in?
I think I would do, first of all, understand the realities today. I would first go in depth in analyzing what exactly does Uganda need right now? What do Ugandans need? No, as opposed to what they want. And to me, Ugandans, of course, need to be supported to get out of this slump, which has been caused by the lockdowns and these health measures which they have put in place. Secondly, the businesses which have been shut for now 3 months almost, they need a lot of support to get up. Then the livelihoods of people, whatever they are doing, they need to be restored. Then there are also the medium-term and strategic kind of priorities which have emerged, like we are talking of import substitution. Since now most of the supply chains have been disrupted and they seem to be heading towards that kind of trajectory in the near future. For 2 years, we might have challenges in the supply chains, which means that we must produce as much as possible here, leave alone the fact that we have been importing a lot also of what we could produce from here. But also, you need to remember that the National Development Plan 3, this is its first year of implementation. Has the media fully really internalized what this National Development Plan is all about? Because to me, it's one of the best plans which have come out of NPA. Of course, this is understandable because there is also a learning curve. They have been learning over the years. Why do I say it is a very good plan? Because it is the first plan to invest in creating productive jobs, but also the first one to have a manpower planning framework. On each of the programs that they are planning, they are showing you the number of people that will be needed, the level of skills they should have, the skill sets, and the gaps which are there, and therefore the level of training which is required. Then it also has interventions on each of the programs which are needed and the reforms which government must carry out in order to implement the plan. And to me, it's not a very ambitious plan like the old ones, because it kind of spreads these investments over the 5 years in a very equitable manner. But now we need to ask ourselves, even without COVID, did this plan address, I mean the budget, did the budget address what the plan is talking about? Because to me, the budget was prepared on the old template. This the new plan is saying we should be a program-oriented, program-based kind of planning and budgeting, but the budget is still based on the various sectors being thrown some money to do their things in their small, domiciles where they are. So I think this is something which, to me, did not come out in the conversation, much as the COVID is there. Before even COVID, the budget was not good enough to implement the first plan of, the first year of the National Development Plan 3.
The other question I want to ask you is, before the budget happened, the president had sort of split the economy into what he called the real economy and the other is the vulnerable economy. And he sort of directed his civil servants to focus more on what he terms as the real economy and let the vulnerable economy be, because he says it will recover with time. But the problem with things like this is that for the media, there are actually faces in this vulnerable economy. There are people's jobs, people who have families to feed, there are people who have to go to school. How should the media behave when a head of state splits the economies into two and literally focuses on one side of the economy, leaving the other?
I think the media needs to get independent and the objective analysis of that kind of dichotomy, because we need to ask ourselves, is there a line which separates the real from the vulnerable? Are these economies separate? Because when you talk of the real economy, you are talking of agriculture, you are talking of manufacturing, you are talking of mining and so on. But look, can agriculture perform well when, for example, hotels which are purchasing in bulk the agricultural produce are not working? When bars and restaurants which are very instrumental in consuming the agricultural produce are not functioning. So the recovery of agriculture hinges on the health or the recovery of the other so-called vulnerable economy. So as a media, I would think that you need to interrogate this by looking at, by challenging this kind of ideology very constructively and respectfully, looking at those people who could be able to analyze this. But I saw everybody jumped on, because the president spoke to our minds a lot. Of course, when he tells you you need food, everybody understands the significance of food. You need, housing, you need health care, you need clothes, you need this. So he was speaking the obvious. And this is what usually mercantilism, does. It appeals to the real demands and needs of people, and it makes it so easy for people to understand the common sense. But economics is beyond common sense. Economics is not common sense because it can sometimes surprise you if you rely a lot on common sense. You build a lot of these factories to produce the products which you are deemed to be for real economy. But without the vulnerable economy, those products become postponable. So you'll find that people might not buy certain textiles which the president is talking about if the vulnerable economy is not also supported to recover quite fast. And also you needed to interrogate which economy of these two employs more people, especially outside the subsistence agriculture. When you look at the employment figures of Uganda, a big chunk of Ugandans are employed in sectors like transport. Over 1.8 million Ugandans are in the transport sector alone. I know it is heavily informal, but that transport sector works and moves better if the vulnerable economy is functioning. And also you need to look at how many people are employed in the hospitality sector. Hospitality is one of the best employers in terms of those jobs which are decent. And look at also the finance sector. Look at in other words, those tourism. Those sectors which we call vulnerable, they are related. There is an interrelationship between them and the real economy. But the point I think the president wanted to show is that my budget should focus more on, first of all, giving Uganda a chance to bounce back by investing more where we have a comparative advantage. And that is the real economy. If you put more money there, it would create a momentum for agriculture to bounce. And Uganda is being actually, all of the macroeconomic models I've looked at, give Uganda a chance to bounce back. Bounce back means that we shall have a short period of recession, and then we get back to a growth trajectory and achieve the 6% by 2022 again.
So my final question is, the minister prepared the media to say that the budget would be re-looked at in this coming week, trimming on where there are excesses and also realigning where priorities need to be. And this process is a heavily administrative process that the media may not have a keen eye to look at. As someone who balances, as both someone that has been in the media, you're still a columnist, but also you are an economist. What are those things that an editor and a journalist walking into a newsroom to tell the story of the rebalancing of the budget, what are those things that they need to look at?
I think number one, you need to look at the NDP. NDP should be your main focal point in realigning this budget, because this NDP has been adjusted for COVID. The COVID challenge has been now incorporated in the programs which which NPA has given to government to focus on. Number two, you need to look at the import substitution agenda and understand which areas of import substitution have been talked about, which items in particular are going to be invested in. Is this budget addressing that? Number three, you need to look at the COVID fiscal stimulus itself, which government put forward, and interrogate its ability to cover especially the vulnerable groups, the groups which are not having these vocal lobbyists who can easily bring them attention from government. These are the SMEs and the informal economy operators, but also look at, interrogate the capitalization rhetoric. They have talked of capitalization of UDB by $1 trillion shillings, actually $1 trillion plus some 45 billion. They have talked of building Namamve, investing in Namamve infrastructure to ensure that it can support industry with about 996 billion shillings. The minister also told us they are going to extend power to all of the industrial parks, all selected industrial parks at a tune of 792 billion. He talked of one major aspect of reducing the domestic arrears of the people who supply the government. So the stimulus has a total of about 5.5 trillion shillings. A good auditor of the budget, and in this case I will mean the editor of a newspaper or a television or a radio station, should be able to interrogate this budget and see, does it address those aspects? And where is that money going exactly? For example, the money which is put in sectors like agriculture, because also it has been on the mouth of everybody how it should get more money. Where is the money in agriculture going? Is it going to the farmer? Which route takes money to the farmer? Because you might get a lot of money in a sector when it is hanging in Kampala here, amongst people who are writing the policies for agriculture, among the people who are putting money in consultancies, among the people who are giving allowances to themselves, among also people who are building roads in agriculture. The money, the budget for roads should be for roads. It goes to the roads, and agriculture remains with that money which goes to the farmers through areas like extension services given to farmers, the inputs that the farmers need, then the investment in agro processing and value addition, and the investment in marketing. Is this budget addressing those areas? Because marketing is going to be so critical now that COVID has disrupted the markets. We need to give more money to the people who market these products to get people's products to the market. So I would really think that look at the value for money in this budget reallocation. Where is it is put? The figures might be big, but what are they going to do in those various votes where they go?
Thank you so much for joining us for Fourth Estate this week. We will continue to keep a media critique eye on how the Ugandan media covers stories, and more particularly, we will keep an eye on how the big stories develop and covered in the Ugandan media. This week, however, we'll leave you with what's happening on the digital spaces. I've been Raymond Wejini. Have yourselves